we have a tension when we try to harmonize or reconcile, I don't like those words, but for language sake, Isaiah and Revelation. There are some timelines that are hard to line up, and this is part of what the problem is.
This is Ask Dr. E, where Dr. Michael Easley answers your biblical or theological questions in 10 minutes or less. Today's question comes from Wanda. She writes, Dear Dr. E, when reading about the new heavens and new earth in Isaiah 65, I read in verse 20, the youth will die at the age of 100, and the one who does not reach the age of 100 will be thought accursed. I wonder if this is support for the idea of a millennial kingdom, or does this refer to some other time? Because it speaks of death, I imagine it's not speaking of the heaven we experience after our resurrection, but I'm not sure what was meant by this passage. I love this part. Other pastors have been happy to skirt this question, but I know you are better than that. Thanks for that vote of confidence, Wanda.
Or it's manipulative, one of the two.
I can respect a woman who figures out how to get what she wants.
Well, she's right in that if you scan commentaries on this, they gloss over this passage.
We do not know.
In the big critical text, it's a lot of swimming. So at the essence is what is the millennial kingdom and what is the future eschatology after Christ returns
new
from
heavens,
the rapture?
new earth.
Right.
Okay.
And New Jerusalem, which the passage mentions. We have a tension when we try to harmonize or reconcile, I don't like those words, but for language sake, Isaiah and Revelation. There are some timelines that are hard to line up, and this is part of what the problem is. I'll try to be as brief as I can on this, and I think Alan Ross, who we told our friends before, Bible.org in the show notes, is a great resource for a lot of sermons and critical studies, and now they have a lot of video even, and it's a good place to go, fairly reliable, very reliable for the resources. And Ross dealt with this passage, and let me just read what he says. John portrays this after the Messianic age. So it must issue into the eternal estate, unless the events in Revelation are not to be taken so strict chronologically. So this happens after the millennial time, but listen to what he says, into the eternal state, unless you can't line up Revelation with chronology. Now let me try to explain what he's saying there. What the passage does tell us, there's joy, because there's a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem. Okay. So that leads into eschatology, not just the millennial kingdom, right? The central focus is on Messiah. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 has a fascinating passage where he talks about Jesus Christ when he hands over the kingdoms to the Father. That has to be during the millennium or as you're going into the eschaton, into the eternal estate. It says he will reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. That's got to be during the millennium or the end times. If you're not a person, I hold to a millennium. If you don't, something's happening there that there's an end point and now eternity begins. So the verses are pretty clear when you read them. But she's right. This is a complication because what does it mean that these young people are going to live and then die? The point that passage is making is it'd be unfounded during this reign or state that a young person would live a long, long, long time. That's the point. Or that old people wouldn't live a long, 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 long time. That's all the point is of the passage. Now, let's go back to millennial reign of Christ. The verses are clear, and they describe either a millennial state or a new creation yet to come. So it's one or the other, and she's right in the question. The problem with it being in an eternal state, why would we be talking about death and the sinner and punishing the wicked? So it's a delicate passage. Isaiah 25 has a lavish banquet for all people. He'll swallow up death for all time, no more tears and so forth. So the sequences are really hard to harmonize. That's the bottom line. If you take Isaiah, these two chapters, 25 and 65, and you go over to Revelation timeline, it's hard to line them up. Ross concludes the passage. He says, for believers, if the new heaven and the new earth come about a little differently than expected, they will not be disappointed.
I like it.
So there's times when you have to be honest with the text and say, there's some difficulties here I can't line up.
Yeah.
But I think she's right on, spot on her point. That couldn't be the eschaton, the future kingdom, if we're talking about death and sin and accursed and his enemies being trampled. That's got to have happened beforehand. But Isaiah 25 makes you scratch your head going, what's the sequence here? So I think it was John Martin who observed in his commentary on Isaiah that you're not trying to force a timeline on it. And the way the book is written, even the 39 chapters being one unit, jumps around a bit. Let's just say it that way. It's not a chronology.
Right.
We look at Revelation as more as a sequential event.
Got it.
So that's a little more helpful from a Bible study angle.
Yep.
But I can't be bulldogmatic on either. I think it's probably eschatological, millennial, because if these things are happening still on earth.
Yep.
But again, it does trip you up on what's actually happening where.
Yeah. All right. Well, Wanda, I hope you feel like you didn't skirt
that didn't help anything.
I think you tried to tackle it head on and do the best. But I think it goes back to your point often. It's like we can't ask the text what it's not saying definitively. It's a complicated passage.
It is. And good for her for catching it. You know? I mean, that's good Bible study.
Totally. All right. Well, if you've got a question for Dr. E, call us, text us, or email us. The info is in your show notes.